So 30 degrees 8 minutes was collected using the best scientific methods of the day. They used an astrolabe tables. And that's what we have. A lot of people put the landing elsewhere. We won't know, we'll never know where he actually landed, because he went north from 30 degrees 8, from that reading, and then he landed. The interesting thing is Herrera doesn't tell us what he did after he landed. April the 3rd, and he names it Florida, right? And then 5 days later on the 8th, they sail north along the coast. So that's 5 days that they were ashore, presumably, looking around, exploring. The fact that they sailed to the north suggests to me that they were exploring to the south. Because if they'd gone to the north, they might not, they will have known what was up to the north. But they go to the north a little bit. For one day, they sail to the north, and then they turn around and go to the south on April the 9th. So they encounter the powerful Gulf Stream on April 21st for the first time. And this is when Alaminos has the idea that, wow, this is a really powerful current. And the ships that were going back to Spain at that time were going through the Mona Passage and heading up north and getting there northing and then heading back to Spain. And he's like, man, you could get this thing. This is a conveyor belt. You get on this thing and you're going north, which is, of course, another reason if you're coasting along the Florida coast offshore, you're probably in this Gulf Stream heading north. So that's when Alaminos made the great observation about the Gulf Stream, which would eventually become the highway back to Spain. And in fact, he would pioneer it during the conquest of Mexico. He was the first to take that route back to Spain with a ship full of gold for the king so that Cortez could get his governorship. It worked. Mid-May, they're along the Florida Keys, which they call the Mártires, or martyrs, because they looked in the distance like suffering men. And the interesting thing about this is they're looking at them from a distance. I mean, they are offshore because they don't want to be anywhere near the Keys because they're shallow, they're reefs. And in this day and age, you sail during the day. If you were on an exploratory voyage and you had no idea where you were, you anchored up at night because you didn't want to run into a reef at night, because that's exactly what happened in the Santa Maria, actually, on the first voyage. So by the 23rd of May, they had either rounded the Marquesa Keys or gone between the Florida Keys and the Marquesas and were up on the west coast of Florida, and probably in a place, Charlotte Bay. And this is where his fate caught him, because the Indians who were in that area were Calusa Indians. They're pretty bellicose, actually, very territorial, and but the thing is, they had these wonderful gold. They were called guanines. They were like these big gold ornaments, like necklaces that would hang here, and those guanines were what Columbus first found in the Bahama Islands, when he said, "That's gold. That's worth having," and he would communicate with the Lucayans, where is the gold, and they'd be like down south in Cuba and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. Well, the gold, there's no gold mines in Florida. So, but he fixated on that gold because that to him was an indicator of good things. So they fought with the Indians there for a while. They did some trade, and then they left to look for some islands that they had heard that lay to the west. And they arrived there on the 21st of June, and they were covered with turtles. And so he called the islands, Las Tortugas, and so they bear that name to this day. And I think the Tortugas and Florida are the two name places that have stuck from that first expedition of Ponce's. Then they departed and they sailed southwest by west, and they sighted land 2 days later. And on the 28th, they anchored and went ashore, and nobody recognized this place. It was the east-west coastline that nobody knew it, but they saw some dogs, and there were signs that there were iron tools. They didn't find tools per se, but they saw things that indicated that iron tools had been used in the area. So they believed themselves that they were in western Cuba. Some people believe that he was actually in Yucatan and therefore discovered Mexico. But it's pretty clear that he was in Cuba, western Cuba, and that the Spanish presence in Cuba at that time was still in eastern Cuba. As a matter of fact, in June of this year, there was a big military push on in Cuba, and the Spaniards were rapidly expanding militarily, but they had not actually gotten to that portion of Cuba. So from there, they decided to head back to the Bahamas. So they sailed back through the Strait of Florida and up the western boundary of the Bahama Islands. And off of one of them, they found a solitary old woman. And this is often where people say Ponce got the legend of the Fountain of Youth from. But the interesting thing, of course, is this occurred after he was in Florida, not before he was in Florida. And in fact, the Fountain of Youth legend is an Indian legend. And the Taino Indians heard that there was a river in Florida and a lake in Florida, or up there to the north, or in Bimini, where, you could be restored to youth. And some people had actually left looking for this and had settled in Florida. And so it's possible that one of the reasons that those Guanines were in Calusa country were because of Indians who were looking for the Fountain of Youth, came up to Florida and established trade links, and therefore that's how gold got into Florida.